Welcome back to part 2 of the restoration of the Western Antique Aircraft and Automobile Museum's New Standard D25. In the previous video, I showed you all the disassembly and inspection and minor repairs that we made to the fuselage, as well as priming and beginning of the reassembly. In this video, we're going to start looking at the wings. So when we disassembled and inspected these wings, we known that the airplane had been in an accident at some point. Repairs had been made. We weren't sure the extent of everything because you can't see everything inside of a wing, no matter how many inspection covers you remove. So with the fabric off, we looked inside, and it turns out the woodwork was all beautiful. We found no problems with the woodwork. We did find that the trailing edges, which are steel tubing, had some corrosion. They had to be removed, sandblasted, and they got re-epoxy primed and reinstalled. And on the right wing, we found that a couple of aileron hinges were not properly aligned. So those got removed and reinstalled so that we could get everything lined up and make things work a lot more smoothly. Then the wings went into the covering shop. And on this aircraft, we're using the polyfiber system. And I'll give you a real quick explanation of how this works, but it's not a full tutorial, just kind of explaining what we're doing. So once your fabric is cut just a little bit larger than the surface that you're trying to cover, you go around with your polytack, which is our kind of like a rubber cement adhesive. It sets up really quickly, so you have to move fast. You kind of slather on a fairly heavy coat and then press your fabric down into that adhesive so you get good saturation through the fabric, and that's what makes that bond so strong, so that this will hold up while you're flying this airplane around at 100 miles an hour out in the wind. Once your glue and adhesive has set up a bit, and this only takes a few minutes, then you can come back with an iron and start to shrink and tighten up that fabric. It helps tighten up that weave, and it gets rid of any of that loose fabric so that you have a nice aerodynamic shape to your wing when you're all done with your construction. And this usually takes about 2 passes at 2 different heats to get everything to kind of a final tension on the fabric. And this is one of the really nice features of the modern covering fabrics of using, in this case, polyfiber system. There's about 3 or 4 covering systems on the market. Polyfiber is the one that I've got the most experience with, and it's also the one that we use on pretty much all of the museum aircraft when we're covering. There are some small and rare exceptions for us. Then after the fabric has been shrunk, we come back with poly brush, which is this pink tinted coating here that's kind of like a little bit of like a rubber coating that goes in. It seals up all of the pores in this fabric. It helps make it a little bit more weather tight, but it also helps just protect all this fabric and keep it lasting a little bit longer. This is similar to, but very different from, the way fabric covering used to be done on wings back in the early 1920s and 30s. This is a polyester-based fabric. Back in the day, airplanes were covered with cotton predominantly, and then instead of using heat to shrink it, they would use something called dope, usually a butyrate or nitrate-based dope that you would brush onto your fabric, and as it dried, it would help shrink that weave. Kind of the way, like, if you put a pair of very comfortable, perfectly fitting jeans into the wash and wash them in hot water and then throw them into the dryer, they're going to come out kind of snug again because that cotton has kind of shrunk a little bit. And that's how we used to shrink wings on airplanes, and that dope would help keep that fabric tight and actually over time continue to tighten a little bit. Once the fabric's been coated with the poly brush, we come back, we mark out 2-inch spacing, lay down chalk lines so that we can have nice even stitching the whole wing all the way across, and also keeps things looking tidy, but also because we need 2-inch spacing on this aircraft for these rib stitches. Then we put down our reinforcing tapes, and this is kind of a cotton tape that's got a little bit, or a fabric tape that's got a little bit of adhesive on the back. Not quite enough to be really easy to work with, but enough to keep it in place while you're stitching, hopefully. And once this is laid down, then we come back with our rib lacing and stitch the wing fabric onto the ribs. This process is a little time consuming, but honestly, it's one of my favorite parts of the whole aircraft restoration process. As someone who never really got into or understood the appeal of knitting or crocheting, I was mildly surprised to find that I actually genuinely really enjoyed rib stitching. I found it to be a really pleasant and vaguely meditative process, which, while I'm not looking to take up any new hobbies anytime soon, kind of helps me understand the appeal. That's fair. Yeah. On the subject of aircraft covering, one thing that I do want to point out or share with everyone is the fact that all of the fabric and chemical for recovering this aircraft was sold to the museum at a hugely discounted price from Consolidated Aircraft Coatings. You can find them at Con Aircraft on Instagram and social media, and over the years they have been huge supporters of our little museum up here in Hood River. They have donated materials and given us great discounts on fabric and everything else we need for covering this airplane. So while this channel is not sponsored in any way and this video is not sponsored, they have definitely made an effort to support our museum over the years, and as such, I would of course be hugely appreciative that if you're considering covering an airplane in the near future, look into Consolidated Aircraft Coatings. They are obviously genuinely enthusiastic vintage aviation supporters, and we hugely appreciate their support. Yeah. Once we had finally finished all the rib stitching after several days of meticulously sewing up these wings, they got covered with pinking strips to seal up and cover all that stitching, and then they got their next couple of coats of polybrush and then poly spray, which is a silver coating that is a UV protective layer, and then finally color, and then stored back in the restoration hangar on wing racks while we finished putting the fuselage back together. Now back to the fuselage, since we haven't looked at that in a minute. As it went back together, there were a few things we needed to update and repair, one of which is this brand new stainless steel firewall. The aircraft had had its original aluminum firewall when we got it, and in doing this restoration, we discovered that that needed to be updated and bring it up to current FAA standards. The other big change is this brand new instrument panel that our shop made, in which they installed for me all of the electrical switches on the right-hand side there in that little square panel. Previously, they had been in a separate electrical box that was mounted behind the pilot's left shoulder that was kind of awkward to reach when you were trying to grab the starter switch behind you while the mag switch was still in front of you on the instrument panel, and it just wasn't particularly user-friendly. The new layout, much better, and it allowed us to move our ammeter up onto the instrument panel where I can actually see it and use it from time to time, as opposed to buried in a box behind my shoulder where it's not very visible. Once all of the electrical had been run, plumbing and fuel lines have been run, and all the big components like the seats and rudder pedals and all that had been reinstalled in the aircraft, and we knew everything was the way we wanted it to be, then it got rolled back into the paint booth so that we could put fabric on the fuselage. And with the new fabric, we also got a new paint scheme, which I'm very excited about. Having been at Oshkosh 2 years ago, I got to see the black and beige New Standard that had just finished its restoration by Ted Davis, who had done a beautiful job on it. And I loved the way that paint scheme looked. I just think that might be one of the most beautiful New Standards in the world. And I love that big scallop paint scheme on the side of the fuselage that is very traditional of the 1930s aircraft, and not really a common paint scheme in the 30s. It's become a lot more common later on, people going back and repainting old airplanes. But nonetheless, I love that look. And this airplane had spent the last 30 years living a specific life as a daily ride hauler and, working airplane with its own previous owner and everything like that. And with the new ownership with our museum, we kind of wanted to make this airplane a little bit more our own. So we changed it up a little bit. And I had taken some time at home and worked out on an old picture of the airplane what I thought would look cool as a paint scheme. I proposed the idea of the WAAAM flying service, and the rest of the crew looked at it and basically said, that looks amazing, we love it, we're going to do it. But we're changing it to WAAAM Flying Circus because that's a little bit more true to the origin of the Barnstormer, which I have to agree. So we painted the airplane with its new look, and I am so excited with the way it turned out. But the other big change that I'm really excited about on this paint scheme is the fact that our WAAAM Flying Circus logo on the side of the fuselage, instead of being a vinyl sticker as we had had in the past on the side of our airplane, this time is hand-painted by my very lovely and incredibly patient fiance, who puts up with all of my free time being spent at the museum, which is probably not the best way to maintain a healthy relationship, but she's incredibly supportive and an incredible artist. So this is that one clip she allowed me to use in this video of her hard at work painting our airplane for us. She's not terribly keen on being on camera, but she is very supportive of my shenanigans. And in the background here, you can see another red, white, and silver airplane in the background that I'll be doing a whole separate video about in the very near future. And that is why I missed out on getting to be there for the actual big reveal of the paint on this airplane, because I was driving across the country to go pick that airplane up and bring it home, along with another very cool airplane project that will get its own separate video as well. Once the aircraft paint had been done and the lettering on the sides had been finished, we got to start assembling all the big parts. And here you can see us putting the wings back on the fuselage, getting all the flying wires and landing wires set up, and struts and everything else like that. It did take us about another week after this just to get everything rigged right so the wings were all pointed the right direction with the correct amount of washout and everything else. And then it was time for final inspections, and you can see one of our IA volunteers here going through and triple checking every nut, bolt, washer, and cotter pin before we took this airplane flying for the first time post-restoration. And so that's it. The New Standard is finished. And if you want to come out and see how beautifully this machine turned out, or come out and get a ride with us, you can come out to the WAAAM, the Western Antique Aircraft and Automobile Museum, any second Saturday of any given month. If the weather permits, we're going to have it out and fly it, and you can check out all the beautiful craftsmanship that our volunteer crew managed to accomplish in just 9 short months. All right, so I'm not going to leave off there. I will let you guys see the finished product, and I've got a couple of clips of it flying around, taking off and landing out of Hood River Airport that I will share with you in this video, but I will probably do a separate video about the airplane's first test flight once we got it all finished. So with that said, I'm going to sign off here, and you can enjoy watching this airplane fly.